The Humane Society Legislative Fund was formed almost 20 years ago. And I'll be honest with you, whether you live in a red state, a blue state, or a purple state, Americans are animal welfare individuals and lovers of animals. Just last year, we ascertained that more than 90 million households here in the United States have at least one pet. And further to that, people spent more than $100 billion on those very pets. So, as you can imagine, this is an issue that resonates regardless of which side of the aisle you are living on. HSLF, the Humane Society Legislative Fund, was formed as a spinoff from the Humane Society of the United States, and our role is to ensure that we are lobbying for federal animal protection measures and also supporting humane candidates. Obviously, those two considerations go hand in hand. So critically important from the perspective of being able to further animal protection at the federal level. The Humane Society Legislative Fund was formed originally in 2004. We really staffed up in 2006, and that was our first congressional election season that year. Since then, we've had an opportunity to work with members of Congress on literally dozens of authorization measures that have been passed into law, and also hundreds of appropriations requests that have had to do with animal protection measures. The members of Congress on this call have been pivotal to many of those issues. Some of them include cracking down on animal fighting in our communities, making sure that wildlife trafficking is not actually sponsoring terrorism the world over. And one that's near and dear to my heart, in 2006, we passed the PETS Act. And that was in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, when we saw those visuals of so many people having to leave their homes and being concerned about being able to leave with their pets. That law has had a significant impact across the United States, and all of the states have measures in place now to ensure that people can keep their pets as part of their families during human disasters. So critical from that perspective. But we work on the entire gamut. We work on everything from pets in your homes to dogs raised in puppy mills to farm animal welfare considerations, wildlife trafficking issues, and Congressman Moran's Humane Cosmetics Act. So there are many issues that are important to ensuring we have more humane communities, and we're really proud of the role that we play there.
Been involved with animal issues my whole life. My grandfather was a farmer, and I often spent summers on the farm. And I had pets growing up. They were just always part of my life. When I was asked to join the Humane Society of the United States board in 2013, I was really delighted to do so. And so just recently, a year ago, I joined the Legislative Fund board. And these two organizations, one working on policy, the other working on legislation, are just so vitally important to animal protection across the globe. And I remember back when I was at college at the University of Maryland in 1970, my mentor, Joe Tidings, championed a bill on horse soring, the horrible practice they put chemicals on horses' feet to get them to raise their gait. And I remember that moment because it passed when I just had come to Maryland. And now 50 years later, we're trying to amend that bill to make it better. But these issues have been part of my life and really our nation's life. And I think they are critical. And I think former members can play such a role here. One interesting statistic that I heard about was that if you look at any congressional district, the biggest constituency in every congressional district are animal lovers. Number one, it beats all other categories. And so there's good politics to work on these issues on a bipartisan basis as well.
I grew up on a farm. My parents and my family, we had a purebred Duroc, Hampshire, and Yorkshire breeding swine business. Started shortly after World War II, and I had, of course, grew up with livestock and tending the livestock, for much of my life before I went off somewhere else after college. But I remember a couple things. I had the grand champion barrel at the Illinois State Fair and the 4-H show. That was a big deal back then. I was pretty devoted to those animals, and I still remember discovering my father's high school animal husbandry textbook on the shelf and reading that back as a teenager. So, my father, my family really instilled the importance of tending animals, treating them well, and ensuring that they enjoy life too, while serving the needs that we have as a society. I had, of course, when I came to Congress, 1994, I was confronted with an issue where I discovered that law enforcement animals, both horses and dogs, were being targeted by criminals. Horses are used for crowd control and other things, and of course, dogs are used to sniff out drugs and narcotics and other illicit substances. But criminals were targeting them, maiming them, killing them, but there were no penalties at the time. And so I worked early on in my congressional career to enact what was called the Animal Law Enforcement Protection Act. It was a bipartisan bill in the spirit of Humane Society Legislative Fund, and we were successful in getting that enacted. And since then, I, frankly, was proud to see it was used several times to prosecute those who were maiming, harming, and killing police animals. So, the bottom line is Humane Society Legislative Fund and all of us that are part of this team, we work in a bipartisan spirit, which really is exhibited today by the former members who are participating in this effort. But as my friend Tom McMillan, Jim Moran, and Peter Roskin will tell you, animal issues are bipartisan issues. They're really nonpartisan issues. And generally, we find, doesn't matter where you live, on a farm or in town or in the city, people care about animals, particularly their pets, but they also care about livestock and wildlife. And the only way we get things done in Congress successfully is to work in a bipartisan way. And that's been one of the successes as we've continued to advocate for animals over the years.
In the Congress, we tend to spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our own family. But if you're looking for people that you can relate to and want to spend time with, invariably it's people who also care, have common priorities, and particularly caring about animals is something that bonds people together, that they have in common. I was just thinking about the fact that the people who worked with me on animal rights issues tended to be friends because that they had an ethic and moral purpose that really guided their actions, and were people I wanted to get to know. These shared experiences of having pets as a child, I guess they must be formative, because we were a low-income family, Irish Catholic, so there were 7 kind of Irish twins, 7 children. I'm sure my mother was not all that pleased when for Easter I brought home a dozen baby ducklings and let them loose on the kitchen floor. Or a few years later, when I brought home 50 chicks, and she had no idea where we were going to put them. But they just gave such joy to watch animals grow, to feed them, to see how they protect themselves, and that is kind of formative. And then I had the honor really of being the chair of the Congressional Animal Rights Caucus for several years, and some of the legislation that I was involved in, as I look back, it was some of the most consequential and satisfying work that I did in the Congress, because I know that it contributed to the welfare of, ultimately hundreds of thousands of vulnerable, innocent species that were otherwise going to be exploited or abused or destroyed. So it was an opportunity, really, to work with a group of other similar-minded people. And as Jerry and Tom have emphasized, it's bipartisan. It transcends politics, and it should.
Well, they brought to my attention this issue about animal fighting in particular, and I had always had a strong interest based on my constituency in suburban Chicago of a sensitivity to animals and caring for them. And there's a lot of support in the district that I represented. So I was looking for ways to connect with the Humane Society, and this seemed like good overlap and a good way that I could be helpful from my point of view. So we began working together, and our colleague, former Congressman Jerry Weller from Illinois, was advocating on their behalf at the time and brought this to my attention. It's interesting because, you know, at one level, you think, well, this is pretty intuitive. You know what I mean? Like, who can argue against a prohibition against animal fighting? And yet there were voices in Congress that said, well, is this an appropriate role for the federal government, or is this animal fighting a cultural dynamic that needs to be protected somehow? And while those aren't insignificant questions and they've got to be dealt with and respected, I think the great weight of the evidence comes down, for me, it came down to answer, yes, this is an appropriate role for the federal government. There is a role to play because of the connection between animal fighting, drug trafficking, other violence, and so forth. And then, you know, there's times when the government will intercede on cultural practices based on the equities of things. And so here, I think the overwhelming weight of the evidence was that there was more to be gained by the prohibition against animal fighting, not just from an animal welfare point of view, interestingly enough, but from a human welfare point of view, that this is something that should be prohibited.
Humane Society Legislative Fund has a broad agenda, and of course, everything from wildlife trafficking to animal testing to the treatment of horses and other animals. And right now, of course, in the Congress, we have what some people call the China bill, other people call the Competes Act. We have some priorities, such as legislation which would prohibit the fishing and sales of shark fins, for example, which is a current practice which is decimating the shark population in our oceans. I'm personally involved in efforts to eliminate animal testing with the Humane Cosmetics Act, which I think Jim Moran has a long-time interest in as well. And we're making progress on that. And then, of course, Puppy Protection Act addressing, puppy mills and the abuse that, breeding animals, breeding dogs and their offspring suffer through in puppy mills. And of course, we have exotic animals, and of course the big cats legislation, which is out there. And I think what's really important to note is several of these bills already have a majority of the House as co-sponsors, for example. And so we've made tremendous progress building bipartisan support. We just have to get through the processes. And as my former colleagues note, there's only so much time on the calendar, so we have to continue to work every day to make sure that animal protection priorities are a bipartisan priority and deserve to be considered on the House and Senate floor.
Humane Society International has partnered with organizations on the ground in a staging area, particularly in Poland. And that partnership also includes a significant grant from the Mars Foundation, which actually manufactures pet food. And what Humane Society International has accomplished is more than 100,000 families coming across the border from Ukraine have brought their pets, and those pets obviously have basic needs that need to be met. And those packages, in conjunction with the Mars Foundation, have provided pet food, pet relief for those families. It's a critical component of work that is taking place in this war-torn country. And the bottom line is, it shows us once again how closely we align ourselves with our pets. They're parts of our family, and be that the case, Whether it is a natural disaster or it's a war-torn zone, we need to be aware of the fact that people are not going to cross the border without their pets. I'm sure all of you have seen the still photos and the footage. It has been heartbreaking to see women and their children with pets under their arms or cats and carriers under their arms crossing into Poland and Romania and other bordering countries. We're just really proud of this partnership with the Mars Foundation and Humane Society International to ensure that these families and their pets have some support in this situation.